every once in a while. We've been having more of them this year, but the work sessions are an opportunity for the city council to ask questions of staff on particular topics and or the presenters. We are not taking public comment tonight. We will allow people to simply listen, record, whatever you want to do, take notes, write down your questions if you have them, but we will not be taking questions or comments from the public tonight. So, Mayor, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I'd also encourage anybody that has any questions as the presentations go through and the council asks questions, please write them down, note them. I and maybe one or two of us will be sticking around after the meeting to talk to people that may have questions. Also, we'll try and look for a way to answer those questions in another way. So if you have questions, please write them down.
And Chad, we're going to turn then over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Because several, if not all, councilors have voiced a desire for a work session regarding the AUAR and its contents, we've called together this work session. We've asked the experts from Kim Horn, who is the firm preparing the AUAR, to come and present today. We also have Ron Intertech here today, who is the firm, the city is, as the RGU, the Responsible Government Unit, has hired as an expert third party to review the document Kim Horn is developing. Mortensen is also present, not as the developer of this project. Google is self-developing this project, but as a consultant to Google, and has some part of the presentation today as well. Lastly, Google has a water and wastewater expert here today to discuss those topics and their inclusion in the AUAR. I think it's important to note that the city, Kim Horn, Braun, the project proposers team have been working on this environmental review for this site since early in 2025. As a refresher on the history of the AUAR for this project, the Environmental Quality Board, or the EQB, first published a public notice for a study of 403 acres on 28 parcels for 1.8 million square feet of development back in May 6th of 2025. The City Council adopted the AUAR in October of 2025. In November of 2025, the proposed project was withdrawn from the Planning and Zoning agenda with the intent of providing the public with greater detail and information on the proposal prior to requesting any approvals from the city. In early March of 2026, the city announced that it would be updating the AUAR, leading us to today, and that to have data center specific and provide the opportunity for additional public engagement. And the updated AUAR process began with EQB's publishing of the large project scoping document later that month in March of 2026. To date, there have been 120 days of formal public comment period allotted in the AUAR process, both combined. Google has hosted an open house related to the scenario being studied in the AUAR to provide opportunity for the public to ask questions and seek answers. Public input has also been received through regular City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. As a result of this public process, the AUAR now contains significantly more detail and information. It also includes significant discussion and review on items not typically covered in an AUAR, such as energy use, electromagnetic fields, heat, and fire risk. Further, significant additions to the mitigation plan have been developed, including the incorporation of groundwater monitoring wells and thermal evaluation of groundwater. As a reminder, this work session is intended to cover the items in the AUAR that we have heard frequent concerns about during this process and allow the City Council to ask their questions of these experts that are here today. As a reminder, though, this work session is on the AUAR and the topics covered within it, including water needs. Those are the experts we have asked to be here today, and this isn't intended to be a question and answer on every aspect of the projects and the AUAR itself and the water demands related to it. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to the people who came to be the experts here today. We're going to start with Travis Fristed from Braun Intertech, again, that third-party consultant the city is here to review.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thanks for inviting me tonight to speak about the AUAR, give an overview, as well as take a deeper dive into the topics. First, we're going to revisit the roles and responsibilities of the project proposer. First, we have the RGU, Responsible Government Unit, that is the City of Hermantown. They're responsible for preparation of the AUAR, reviews the AUAR to ensure the completeness and adequacy. The RGU's consultant, that would be myself, with Brown Airtech, been retained by the city to provide oversight in preparation and review the process for the RGU on behalf of the city. We also have the project proposer, Harmony Group LLC. They initiated the project in the AUAR. And the project proposer's consultant, Kim Warren, is with us tonight. They prepared the AUAR on behalf of the project proposer with the oversight by Brown. So what is an AUAR? Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review. It's a form of environmental review provided for the rules and applies for certain scenarios. This particular large scoping AUAR has attributes of an environmental assessment worksheet and environmental impact statement, or EIS. The environmental analysis before residential, commercial, warehousing, or light industrial development occurs, so it's meant to inform development scenarios. It provides the useful information for planning for the management and mitigation impacts. It studies the process and is managed by the RGU, so it's managed by the city. One important note on this, it's valid for 5 years. It does require to be updated every 5 years as development occurs within that study area. And it's not valid for certain projects that are not consistent with the development scenarios in the final AUAR. It is not a project approval document. It is used to inform local planning and development decisions. So we want to spend some time on the AUAR versus the EIS, comparable levels of analysis and the different purposes. This was a common theme in the comments that were received during the public comment period. For the AUAR, as I mentioned, it covers residential, commercial, warehouse, light industrial. It can be a mix of those uses or a single use. EIS covers a large specific project, such as nuclear, fuel, waste, mining, or pipelines. The AUAR evaluates a study area versus the EIS is a project-specific review for certain mandatory conditions. An important note too is that geographic analysis of that study area is comparable to an EIS, so we still have to compare that study area to an EIS and those thresholds. It also includes that mitigation plan, as well as the EIS looks at the alternatives to that single proposed project. The AUAR also looks at the big picture, the maximum build-out scenario for that study area, and again, frames up the mitigation that would be needed for future permits, future land use approvals, those types of things. So a quick overview. The previous AUAR had 1.8 million square feet proposed of light industrial use. The current AUAR also has 1.8. One difference is a reduced study area, so that geographic area got smaller. More resource topics were included and evaluated, including cooling technologies, water resources, energy, heat, and fire risk. And then the scoping process defined the scenario and outlined the AUAR. That was accepted on May 18th, 2026. So the comment period ended on July 16th. We received 192 public comments. And that's 192 letters, so there's multiple comments in those letters. Major themes were concerns about water resources, wildlife, lighting, noise, construction, project design, general opposition or support of the project, and then the general environmental review process. We did have 4 agency and tribal government comments. Those were from SHPO, Municipal Pollution Control Agency, Fond du Lac, and 1854 treaty area. The SHPO concurred that no cultural resources are eligible within that study area for listing on the National Register. MPCA requested more analysis of alternative sites and project configurations, utility reviews, Charlotte Street proposed impacts, cumulative effects from utility extensions, long-term mitigation. Fond du Lac and Cure, more environmental, cultural, tribal, and cumulative impacts review through an EIS was the request. And 1854, concern regarding treaty rights, tribal consultation, environmental review adequacy, and impacts to natural and cultural resources. Changes to the final AUAR. There will be some changes to the final AUAR from the comment period. We highlighted 10 changes there. More EMF background, so more information on EMF will be presented in the final AUAR. There was field work for spring verification of groundwater monitoring to further evaluate nearby trout streams. More information on construction activities, specifically durations of those activities. Urban heat island effect, background on that information. Air quality analysis for potential backup generators. One topic was list of additives for cooling technology, which I believe we'll have more information on that here later. Provide some conceptual visualizations of what the site would look like. Explanation of infrasound and how that's measured. And important note, agency is responsible for enforcing the mitigation plan, so there'll be a lot of information on who's responsible for what on that mitigation plan, and additional clarifications in various sections throughout the entire document. So with that, I'll like to hand it off to Layla Bunky with Kinley Horn, who should take a deeper dive into some of those topics.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is Layla Bunky with Kinley Horn, and tonight I'll be presenting an overview of the updated Hermantown Industrial AUAR. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to provide you an overview of the environmental review that's been completed to date for the proposed data center development within the study area. I'll discuss the key findings and mitigation measures identified in the AUAR, and I'll note where public and agency feedback received during the review process has or is still being incorporated. This slide provides a summary of the environmental review topics that were analyzed in the AUAR, such as land use, climate resiliency, geology and soils, groundwater, surface water, wetlands, wildlife, air quality, greenhouse gas, visual, noise, transportation, as well as several additional topics that were identified from the community, which include energy infrastructure, heat generation, fire protection, and electromagnetic fields. For each topic, the AUAR identifies potential impacts of these resources and corresponding mitigation measures. One of the most important outcomes of the AUAR is not simply the environmental analysis itself, but the adoption of the mitigation plan that accompanies it. The mitigation plan serves as the city's roadmap for managing future development by identifying specific measures that must be implemented to avoid, minimize, or mitigate potential environmental impacts. The mitigation plan itself identifies the mitigation measures and also the entities responsible for implementing and oversight. And this helps ensure that the environmental mitigations are not merely recommendations, but are tied to future regulatory review and project approvals. One of the questions that came up during the scoping comment period as well as the draft AUAR was, is the AUAR just guidance? And one thing I just want to make sure is noted here is that once the city adopts the AUAR and that mitigation plan, that mitigation measures identified become an important part of future development review. For example, when development projects are proposed within the study area, the city can require compliance with the adopted mitigation plan through approvals such as the special use permit or the site plan review. Project applicants then must demonstrate how their development will comply with the mitigation measures identified in the AUAR. Many mitigation measures are also implemented through other permits issued by agencies such as wetlands, stormwater, and air quality permits. And these measures are enforceable not only by the city, but also those agencies that are responsible for issuing and administrating those permits. So now in these next couple slides, I'll go over the different resource topics and a summary from them. So this first one talks about climate and land use. The AUAR concludes that future data center development is consistent with the City of Hermantown's future land use framework. However, the project proposer would need to apply for a special use permit, and that would be subject to local permitting requirements to mitigate for any potential land use conflicts to nearby residential areas. Some of those would include noise, visual, and lighting. The mitigation plan also includes site design, landscaping, sustainability, and stormwater management measures intended to improve long-term resiliency and climate adaptation. The next section is geology and soils. Due to the proximity to trout streams nearby the study area, development activities would require stringent erosion control, sediment control, and stormwater management practices, both for construction and post-operation. The review also emphasizes avoiding and minimizing impacts to wetlands wherever possible. Any unavoidable wetland impacts would require WACA approval and permitting, including mitigation through the purchase of wetland banking credits. No Army Corps wetlands are within the study area that would be impacted, and that was confirmed this past June with correspondence from the Army Corps.
Can you repeat that? What did you just say?
So we did get correspondence from the U.S. Army Corps that there would be no jurisdictional wetlands impacted within the study area. All right, the next topic is groundwater resources. Groundwater withdrawal is not proposed as the project intends to use non-evaporative cooling systems. Due to the potential for nearby springs, additional field work is being conducted to complete a spring inventory survey that will document potential springs, seeps, and other groundwater discharge features within the study area and targeted adjacent areas. The next step of this evaluation will also include field reconnaissance to further evaluate existing groundwater surface water interactions and potential connections to nearby wetlands. Both of these evaluations are underway, and we have been coordinating with the MPCA and DNR staff on using this study to help inform final design plans to ensure that no impact to adjacent cold water resources occur in the future. Additionally, due to shallow groundwater in the area, some dewatering might be needed during construction. To ensure there are no effects on adjacent wells during construction, the project proposer will complete a pre-construction survey of groundwater table elevation, as well as installing piezometers to monitor groundwater elevation throughout construction. The next slide is a summary of the stormwater evaluation. Due to the quantity of the wetlands on site, as well as nearby trout streams, particular attention is required for maintaining water quality and temperature within the surrounding watershed. The AUAR includes a stormwater management plan designed to control quantity and quality to protect those downstream resources. A series of 8 filtration basins are proposed to be located throughout the study area to serve as the primary stormwater management system for the development. Filtration with under drains is proposed due to the inability to infiltrate with the presence of poor soils and nearby trout streams. The City of Hermantown regulates temperature, rates, and treatment of stormwater from development, and the MPCA requires enhanced construction stormwater management, best management practices through their permitting process that the project would have to adhere to. And I'll pass it off to Anthony to cover the water and wastewater.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. My name is Anthony Giovanoni. I lead the Water Supply and Infrastructure team for Google. First, I just want to thank you for having this session. You know, we are very much committed to having these conversations with you and with the public. We are taking your feedback, we're listening to it, and you know, we're here to participate in this public process. I have a couple slides on water and wastewater, and I encourage you to ask me questions throughout, so just let me know if you have specific questions. But this was sort of mentioned already. This facility is planned as a facility that will not use evaporative cooling technology, so non-evaporative. Basically what that means is we're evaluating air-cooled and dry-cooled technologies. You fill the cooling loop once, and then only for maintenance items are you replenishing any of that water. So, and I'll get into the volumes here in a minute. We do add corrosion inhibitors and antimicrobial agents to the water, and really there's a good reason for that, and that is because we don't ever have to we never want to replace that water. So we have facilities that have been operating for years, some over 10 years, where we have not had to replace large volumes of that water. And so by maintaining that and continually monitoring it, we can basically fill up that closed loop system once and not have to continually replenish it. All the water, as was just mentioned, is going to be coming from the city via dilute, and same thing on the sewer side. Any sewer discharges would be discharged through the sewer system. There would not be any groundwater used for filling the closed loop cooling system. There are no plans for on-site consumptive wells, and we would follow all local, state, and federal requirements as it regards to discharge, and we would not be able to discharge anything on-site. That would all have to go to a proper wastewater treatment facility. Just in terms of volumes, so domestic water, that's what we're using for kitchens, bathrooms, daily use. We are projecting about 50,000 gallons per day as a maximum usage. So that would be, we have to size these things as if the whole facility is being operated. There's a whole bunch of people on site using kitchens, using bathrooms. So 50,000 gallons per day is a maximum number. In terms of commissioning water, we are projecting 1.7 million gallons to commission the facility. As I mentioned, once we fill that loop, we hope to never have to replace that, and I'll get into maintenance in just a second, but 1.7 million gallons per building, and that is a one-time fill of those closed loops. In terms of maintenance, yes, we do have to maintain valves. We do have to maintain pressure regulators. We do have to maintain the system in general. There's a lot of testing that goes on. We are projecting up to 12 times annually 2,000 gallons. So 24,000 gallons per building of the closed loop system would need to be replaced per year. That, in my opinion, is a very high estimate. We want to provide to you all the high-end estimate of what we're thinking versus the low end. So we really feel this would be the absolute high end of what we would need to replace from a maintenance perspective. Are there any questions on this before I move to the next slide?
Are the 2,000 gallons for maintenance once a month essentially? Does that count against the 50,000 gallons? It's daily, yes.
Count against in...
So the facility's capped at 50,000 gallons of water.
Oh, yes. So we would never withdraw more. I understand that. We would never withdraw more than 50,000 gallons per day. So we would need to work that into the 50,000 gallons per day. It's very unlikely that we would see 50,000 gallons per day on a regular basis, right? So let's just say on average we're seeing something like 15,000 or 20,000. So that 2,000 would be part of the 50,000.
I have a couple follow-up questions. Do you typically do lawn irrigation at your facilities?
Lawn irrigation?
Lawn irrigation? In other words,
It depends on the facility, but
either way, that 50,000 would be part of that.
that's correct.
Okay. You had mentioned that there was something added into the cooling water.
Yes.
And what was that, or what is that?
Yeah, so right now we're working with the wastewater receiving facility to determine exactly what chemicals we're going to be using in the closed loop system. It's going to depend on a couple of different things, but generally speaking, they're going to be anti-corrosive and antimicrobial agents.
So you're working with WLSSD now to determine that?
Correct. They will dictate how much and what we are allowed to discharge. If we are not allowed to discharge to them, we will have to ensure that any of that material, whether it's during maintenance or during commissioning, is collected and then shipped to a facility that can handle it. Every wastewater treatment plant is a little bit different. I didn't say this, but I'm a professionally licensed engineer out of Illinois, and I've worked with a lot of wastewater treatment plants. Some of them are used to this type of waste. They have the biology and the physical and chemical systems to handle cooling tower waste or cooling system waste, rather, and others are not. And so at this point, we have to go through a pretty comprehensive pre-treatment process with them to determine exactly what we can use here.
And what about a catastrophic loss of that cooling water? What would happen then? How do you prepare a plan for that?
Sure. We would have all the measures in place so that it would not would not escape from the facility, and so that we could contain it within the facility. And then obviously we'd have to bring in cleanup in order to manage that. I think one of the questions that people often ask is like, well, what happens to the data center? it would have to shut down in that case, right? So you would have to shed load effectively and effectively stop operating if something like that were to happen because, if something that catastrophic were to happen. What I will say is that there are measures in place to shed load quickly from these facilities if something like that were to happen.
And if there was a loss, there's valves and a process of shutting things down and stopping that catastrophic loss, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned air-cooled and dry-cooled systems. Is
Yes.
that a combination? Is that an either-or? Is that new technology coming up?
Great segue to the next slide. So I'm gonna, let me go right into your question here. So what we are proposing is a closed loop system. The simplest way to think about this is an air-cooled system is kind of like an air conditioner at your home. A dry-cooled system is like the radiator in the car. I think typically that cooling fluid you're changing once every 100,000 miles or something like that. We hope to never have to change ours, but that kind of speaks to the technology and not having to change that closed loop liquid. These technologies have been around for a long time. And I think it's also important to note that not only are we operating non-evaporative cooled data centers today, in an evaporative cooled data center, there actually is a closed loop. So if you're looking at this figure here, and this is just for comparison, on the evaporative cooling side, we have that open loop where you're bringing in water and that's being evaporated, and the evaporation process is what's providing cooling. But you can see there's a heat exchanger and then there's a closed loop system on the inside. So a lot of folks ask, how long have you been operating closed loop systems? Well, basically since we've been operating data centers, we've been operating closed loop systems. But specifically related to air-cooled and dry-cooled technologies, I believe air-cooled technologies or ACCs have been around since the 60s, and dry coolers were used at industrial scale around the 90s. Just a little bit more on this diagram. So the lower image is the closed loop system. As you can see, there's an internal loop that goes inside of the data center and then to a heat exchanger. The water in that closed loop is cooled and then that's returned to cool off the servers. The external loop, which is also closed, is basically going to either a dry or an air cooler. There is a compressor, which can be bypassed, in particular with the dry cooling technology. And then basically you're using outside air to cool that loop, and that's being returned and via the heat exchanger cooling off the data center.
I've been told that a closed loop system is louder. The cooling towers from a closed loop is louder than an open loop?
Air-cooled chillers can be louder, yes. That being said, I just want to be very clear that any local regulations around noise we would be compliant with. And so that needs to be considered in the design of those specific units. And yeah. Anything else? Leila?
All right, the next topic I'll go over is the contamination. So the AUAR includes results from a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment to identify any known contamination within the study area, as well as identify mitigation needed prior to construction commencing. This assessment concluded that the proposer must complete a response action plan and construction contingency plan prior to construction, as well as coordination with MPCA on safe handling and disposal of any contamination prior to construction. Future data center development would produce electronic waste or e-waste, and Google intends to reuse, remarket, or recycle equipment to minimize the amount of e-waste going to any landfills. The project may also include backup generators for emergency electrical use. Storage fuel tanks on site for these would be subject to U.S. EPA regulations and enforced by MPCA to ensure proper use and storage of the fuel. The study area could contain habitat used by various wildlife species, including some species that require additional regulatory consideration. Through coordination with the DNR, mitigation would include minimizing unnecessary vegetation removal, restoring disturbed areas, supporting pollinator habitat, and following tree removal window restrictions to protect sensitive species that may be present. Historic and cultural resources were evaluated through several studies and consultation with SHPO as well as tribal governments. The review did not identify direct impacts to known historic or archaeological resources. However, mitigation is included that if any unexpected discoveries occur, they would appropriately be handled during construction. The project proposer will also continue coordination with the tribes that have expressed interest in or have a cultural affiliation with the study area. Visual impacts to adjacent residences may be moderate without mitigation. The mitigation plan includes vegetative buffers, screening walls, selective grading, and lighting with downward-facing, fully shielded LED fixtures to ensure there's no light pollution or glare to adjacent properties. Lighting intensities must also comply with city ordinances and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidance. Pass this on to Chris to talk about tribal engagement to date.
Good evening or good day, Mayor and City Council members. Chris Bates, I work at Morrison Development. As Chad mentioned earlier, we are a consultant to Google on this project. I'm here to talk a little bit about tribal engagement for the project. So in 2025, during the AUAR process, we met with Fond du Lac Resource Manager and his team to have tribal participation in the archaeological, too far away. Got it. I'll start over. So yeah, in 2025, during the AUAR process, we met with the Fond du Lac Resource Manager and his team to have tribal participation in the on-site archaeological and cultural resource survey. We completed that on the study area in the fall of 2025. It took about 4 weeks of on-site shovel testing, and we coordinated with their team to identify exactly what areas of the site we should do that shovel testing on that they identified. And that report was completed and reviewed with their team in late 2025. We also met with the Fond du Lac Reservation Business Committee in the fall of 2025 and again in early 2026 to discuss the project, the schedule, the results of the survey that we completed, and discuss ongoing coordination. With the upcoming public infrastructure project, if the project gets approved, we will be engaging the Fond du Lac Resource Manager again to have participation in the upcoming cultural resources survey work for that public infrastructure project. And we'll also continue all of our coordination efforts with the Fond du Lac tribe and also other tribes that have expressed interest in or have cultural affiliation with the study area, which includes Fond du Lac, 1854 Treaty Authority of Grand Portage, and Boyce Fork Hills. Back to Layla.
Here, a quick question. What is it? What exactly do you mean by continued coordination?
Yeah, so I work at Morrison Development, working with Google, and so working with the Google team with Halston. There's some upcoming meetings that we're working to schedule with the various tribes listed on the slide. And you know what that will involve is something that Halston will meet with them about, but essentially working through the environmental review, making sure they understand and have any of their questions get answered, and then just really understanding anything else that would be good to discuss with them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, jumping into the next next resource topic. The project may include backup generators for emergency electrical use, and depending on the quantity needed, could require additional environmental review and permitting. Generators need to be tested once per month for maintenance, otherwise they would only be used if there was an emergency or a grid outage. Because the generators are intended to operate only during emergency events and limited maintenance, the project is expected to operate under an MPCA registration option D permit with enforceable annual emission limits. Therefore, impacts to air quality are not anticipated. And this is a section that we added more evaluation to in the air quality section based on comments received during the draft AUAR comment period. Greenhouse gas emissions were also calculated for both construction and operation, and the project proposer has committed to about 40 different greenhouse gas mitigation strategies to reduce emissions both from construction and from operations. Some of those strategies include using recycled concrete, aggregate, or pavement, using local construction contractors, expanding tree plantings, installing cool roofs, walls, and enabling new clean energy resources in the region. Analysis evaluated noise, both audible and low frequency noise, generated from operational equipment, cooling systems, and backup generators. Just a brief definition for context of what those different terms mean. A-weighted decibels, or dBA, represents how the human hears, and C-weighted decibels, or DDC, is sound pressure that emphasizes more low-frequency sound energy, so any sound below 200 hertz. Infrasound was another topic that was brought up during the comment period, and we will be updating the AUAR to include a summary of that, but just for definition purposes, infrasound is any noise below 20 hertz, so lower than low frequency. Infrasound is typically inaudible to humans. Low frequency noise and infrasound have been subject to ongoing research for several decades. At present, there is no broadly accepted international consensus regarding appropriate exposure thresholds to low frequency noise or infrasound from industrial facilities. The AUAR analysis found that noise mitigation would be required, and once the final site configuration has been determined, the conditions of the special use permit would require the preparation of a noise model that demonstrates compliance with both state noise regulations and the City of Hermantown zoning code. The proposed noise mitigation measures could include acoustic enclosures for cooling equipment, different equipment selection, operational controls, landscaping, and noise walls. And with mitigation, noise levels during operation would not be louder than today. The transportation analysis evaluated both construction and operational traffic. The traffic generated under operations would be similar to the amount of traffic generated you could see expected under a gas station, while construction traffic would be similar to a grocery store. Construction traffic is approximately double the normal operating traffic during peak hours. The AUAR identifies roadway and intersection improvements that may be necessary as development occurs, along with traffic management strategies during construction so that all intersections will operate acceptably and equal to today's conditions. Cumulative potential effects evaluated reasonably foreseeable future projects impacting the same resources as those from a data center development in the study area. The AUAR evaluates cumulative potential effects within each resource section and also provides mitigation where needed. Other future project impacts would also be addressed through their own regulatory permitting process and would need to be individually mitigated to ensure no cumulative impacts occur. This next slide here summarizes several topics that were identified to be studied during the AUAR scoping process that are outside of the typical AUAR evaluation. Regarding energy, the AUAR includes information regarding power needs for the data center, as well as existing and proposed energy infrastructure and associated costs. Minnesota Power would provide the energy, and Minnesota law ensures existing customers do not pay for costs associated with connecting and serving a new large power customer. Additionally, this project would enable the development of 700 megawatts of new clean energy resources without increasing costs to existing customers. And this would also be contributing then to Minnesota Power's clean energy goals. The second topic was a review of EMF, or electromagnetic fields. According to multiple technical studies on this topic from the World Health Organization as well as international safety guidelines, EMFs found in and around data centers are not considered harmful. Radiation exposure from being inside a data center, even for long working hours, is no different than being in a room full of computers and networking switches. EMFs from new transmission lines would be studied by Minnesota Power and would also include EMF mitigation strategies to ensure that the EMF radiation levels from the transmission lines would remain well within safety thresholds. Some of these strategies include maintaining safe distances from residential areas, using EMF shielding techniques where necessary, and adhering to the recommended exposure limits set by health and safety regulatory bodies. Additionally, the EMF emissions from high voltage transmission lines are closely monitored by the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission and regulated to prevent any adverse environmental or health impacts. Regarding the last topic on this slide, fire at a data center campus, the future facility would be permitted according to local regulations, which would be the city of Hermantown. Once operational fire hazards are regularly evaluated and all fire protection systems and equipment would be inspected, tested, and maintained to be in compliance with state law and state requirements. The City of Hermantown Fire Department would conduct annual inspections, reporting and assist with mitigating any fire hazards to ensure compliance with the state fire code. Another topic identified during scoping was heat impacts from data centers, specifically a concern that it would cause urban heat island effect, which, to define this term briefly, is when an area sees an increase in temperature from the significant replacement of vegetated land to an urban area with buildings, pavements, and other impervious surfaces that absorb and re-radiate solar energy. The magnitude and extent of any localized warming from this project or any development are influenced by numerous site-specific factors, including facility size, cooling system configurations, operating load, atmospheric stability, wind speed and direction, surrounding land cover, vegetation, and regional climate. This area sees cooler climate, seasonal variability, and is surrounded by vegetative land, which differs substantially from warmer urban environments. While data centers do expel some heat, it would be very localized to the cooling equipment areas and would not result in heat island effect felt off-site. Additional climate and adaptation measures, such as landscaping, additional tree plantings, and using light-colored pavement to reduce heat absorption, would also be implemented as part of construction site design. So just a couple wrap-up notes here on next steps. So we are working still with city staff as well as Braun to incorporate the final updates that I've mentioned throughout the presentation, as well as the response to comments that we received during the draft AUAR comment period. Once complete and reviewed by staff, the final AUAR will be submitted for an additional 10-day state agency review, after which the City Council will consider adoption of the AUAR and the associated mitigation plan. And then on behalf of the project proposer, I'd also like to share a few next steps that they are planning as part of ongoing community engagement. So in the coming months, they will be holding a series of small group meetings with various stakeholders, conducting a public webinar to provide more educational opportunities, as well as a formal announcement of Google's community investment initiatives. And so more information on those next steps can be found on their project website at hermantowndataCenter.com. Thank you for your time tonight, and my team and I would be happy to answer any questions. I have a few other subject matter experts here with me tonight, too, depending on the topic.
We hear about backup power being needed with generators and possibly battery power. When is that level decided? How many generators, what type of backup power?
Yeah, that would happen once the project gets more into final design, so post the AUAR.
But as part of the special use permit and the site design, it would be included in that.
Yes.
And relative to that, could you go back, you kind of went over that one point, that's the hours of backup generators.
Just
Yeah.
Yes.
there.
There you go.
I did have a question about this.
So backup generation testing would happen between 8 and 5, Monday through Friday.
Correct, yes.
I did have a question. If you want to skip forward one slide, actually. It says, maybe this is the wrong slide. There's an enforceable annual emissions limit for generators. Does the testing count towards that annual emissions limit? And if they hit that limit in, say, July, are they not allowed to use the generators the rest of the year then, or how does that work? Is it a fine? Is it a shut-off?
So the testing would be accounted for that annual emissions limit.
Okay. And then if they hit the limit, are they not allowed to use their backup generators for the rest of the year? It says annual, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm right person to answer that question.
I presume now with additional permitting.
Yeah. So it would be not with additional permitting allowed. But that, I guess that whole, the whole evaluation of air quality with that would consider those emergency situations plus maintenance. So that would be what the permit would be for, is to understand like what that whole picture would look like.
I have several questions, some of them Anthony may need to respond to. Wells on the proposed site, there's obviously the homes that are there, and there's, I believe the number is around 17 existing wells on the site. You said there was no intention to use those, but what will happen with those? Will they be capped, covered, filled with that night? What happens with
Yeah,
those wells?
those would be sealed and abandoned
Okay.
for the Department of Health standards.
Yeah. And I heard a lot about studying of the groundwater levels. We talked a lot about concerns about the neighboring wells. What are we doing to ensure that the neighbors' wells are protected? And if something happens, contamination, drying up, what do we do with it then?
So there would be a survey done prior to construction to understand existing conditions, and then there would also be monitoring wells installed throughout the duration of construction to make sure that there is that monitoring happening, whether it's groundwater level table changing or any other impacts. And that would, if there was a concern that was brought up, that would result in halting construction then.
In a survey of those wells of the neighboring properties, what does that entail? Do you physically go and measure the volume? Do you test the water and measure quantity and quality of the water, or what do you do there for surveying?
So the scope that we have currently for the groundwater monitoring is to install those wells well before construction so we can get baseline measurements of groundwater elevations. Those wells would be installed at depths of 30 to 60 feet. So within the depths of the groundwater that we may expect to encounter during construction. Those wells are installed with a data logger that take hourly readings of the groundwater elevations. And that is the primary reading that we're taking on those.
Okay. I think it was, what I understood, a survey of the neighboring wells. There's no surveys of the neighbors' wells.
We're not surveying individual residence wells. We'll be installing wells around the perimeter of the site. So 7 wells will be installed, and they'll be just outside of the limits of our construction so that they can remain in place throughout construction. They're planned along the boundary of the site.
Okay. I heard that the low frequency or infrasound is going to be further studied. That's correct. Closed loop, we talked about generators. Maybe I'm not sure if you're the right person, but blasting, I've heard concerns that there could be blasting. Do we know, has there been any studies? Does this include studies if bedrock's been found anywhere and there's going to be blasting to the buildings or for water lines, utility lines, etc.?
Yeah, not anticipating any blasting. We've had several geotechnical borings completed, several more to complete. I think we're north of 80 borings to date. No bedrock encountered in those. And our excavations aren't at depths that U.S. Geologic Survey maps bedrock to be at.
And then what about the stability of the ground? Do you think is piling going to be necessary for the building construction?
No, the current recommendations from our geotechnical partners that traditional spread footing, shallow foundations will be suitable for the building loads.
All right. My questions are in no particular order. The construction hours, I think that's something I'd like to talk about as a council as we move forward.
It's on my list too.
Okay. So I don't know if we want to do that now, but that's before we, and I think that, is that AUAR or not? That would be more just a permit?
Mayor Shea, Councilor Geisler, the city of Hermantown currently has construction limited between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. 7 and Eric's absent, obviously, and he would be the one that would have that, but we would expect that this project would follow the same rules as all other construction that happens in the city of Hermantown.
I think that's what John was.
Yeah, but that's scheduled to a permit that the city's going to issue at some point down the road, right?
Any limitations on construction hours, that would be project specific, up to city attorney, would have to be a condition of the special use permit.
Okay, thank you. In the stormwater diagram, there was a pipe that went up to collect in a heavy event, the overflow, and then it was just to show the pipe going out, it said outflow. Where does that outflow go?
Before you leave, I've got one question. You talked about the monitoring wells. Are those capped once construction's complete?
Yeah, those would be sealed and abandoned.
Thank you.
Hey, John Segrist with Kinley Warren here, working on the stormwater management for the project. So yeah, that diagram is kind of a general overview of what the basin's schematic would be. Each basin will have an outlet control structure that then is piped to the downstream wetlands. So in existing conditions, the whole site drains southwest or southeast to the wetland complex, and then also south or northeast to the northeast wetland complex. The proposed development would maintain the existing drainage conditions, so the stormwater would go through the ponds, treated stormwater, and then be discharged to the downstream wetlands.
Is it designed to contain all of the stormwater on the site?
Yeah, so the water quality volume, which is an NPCA requirement as well as City of Hermantown requirement, would be treated in the filtration media. So that water would draw down through a filtration media and collected in that drain tile lines and then go out to the wetlands. If an extreme event were to occur, it's like the 100-year event is what was modeled, the ponds would be able to retain that water to not cause downstream flooding and also keep on-site infrastructure safe as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
I hate to backtrack, but the monitoring wells if the monitoring wells are capped post-construction, how does Google plan to monitor the quality of the groundwater throughout the life of the facility? There's lots of concerns about contaminating groundwater, etc.
Yeah, I don't know if there's, we could have a conversation about leaving wells in place.
Mayor Shea, Councilor LeBlanc, because the main threat to groundwater on this project was construction activity with compression of soils, or if there is bedrock encountered, the thinking was that the duration of construction and perhaps a year following construction would be the main objective, because there is no appropriation from groundwater and no continuing groundwater implication post-operation. The thinking was that it wouldn't be necessary to continue to monitor groundwater during operations post-construction.
In the event of a spill or contamination, like John was talking about earlier, these wells would be capped so they could be re-examined, or would they be filled?
Well, actually, so the stormwater basins that John was mentioning, all of those outlet control structures are being designed with a sluice gate, so if there is a spill, the site can be completely contained to allow cleanup to happen. The basins are also designed with an impermeable liner, and so there are those measures in place. But yeah, I think if we can have a conversation about leaving wells in place post-construction.
I'll shoot you another chat.
Just for a couple more questions, I think I heard in the presentation that before the final AUAR, we will see an updated site plan. Is that true?
The concept scenario that we studied in the AUAR will remain the same. So the updates that we have been making to the final AUAR are in response to public and agency comments.
Okay. I'm understanding that there will be some changes to the site plan from what the concept is. The AUAR is still valid even though there's change in the shape of the buildings, configuration of buildings, placement of buildings, etc.
So any development proposal that comes forward has to be within the assumptions made within the AUAR. So this looked at the upper limit in terms of square feet and other resource topics. So yes, there could be a proposal that comes in with fewer buildings, fewer square footage, but it cannot exceed the assumptions that we made in the AUAR.
And Chad, that would be at the time of any special use permits, etc. We would see those updated plans.
Member Shea, Councilor Geisler, that's correct. Updated plans, the plans that are submitted as a part of the CIDP and the SUP will be final plans. This simply sets, the AUAR simply sets the upper limit of what would be allowed under the environmental review.
I have some further questions about construction noise and mitigation required with that. Again, at some point, we'll see what that mitigation is going to be. Walls, at the open house, I saw some site images that showed walls, some vegetation, etc. Obviously, to build those, that's going to make construction noise, but is the intent to build those walls before the majority of the building construction is ongoing, or in other words, will those walls help with the construction noise? Do you do all the construction and then build the walls last? Kind of what's the process of that?
Yeah, the AUAR, this next version will include some expectations for what during each phase of construction you could expect to hear from noise. There's not anything that's been identified that would be an unusually loud noise, so there isn't going to be walls that would be built for construction noise.
Other than the final placement of the final noise mitigation.
Right, if there was noise walls needed for, that would be for operational, operational once the data center's been constructed, not prior to that.
And can you elaborate a little bit more about every 5 years the AUAR needs to be updated? At some point, is it done being updated?
It is once the development is fully complete. So it would be updated every 5 years until that occurs.
In your presentation, you had several mitigation strategies identified. If this was an EIS, would those mitigation strategies be included or not?
It would be the same. It would still include kind of a range of what the mitigation options would be.
I think those are my questions. Thank you.
During your presentation, you said that the noise in the facility wouldn't exceed the current noise measured on site. What was the noise measured on site? Do we know?
Hi, I'm Jake Ackerman. I'm the acoustics lead on this project with Kinley Ward. And forgive me, I don't know the exact number. I know it was in the high 50s, which is above the state standard currently. So mainly what we were trying to reflect in the AUAR is that our anticipated project noise levels are going to be below the state standard because they have to be. Google has also agreed to do an additional voluntary commitment all the way down to 47 for the typical operations. And that is significantly lower than the current noise levels we're seeing in the project area that are in the high 50s. So that is what Layla was referencing.
Can you explain the process of the studies that are in the AUAR with the receptors and explain how all that was done and kind of put it in simpler terms, I guess?
Absolutely. Sorry. Is it picking me up properly?
As long as you get close to it.
So we build a model in a software called SoundPlan. There's a handful of them that professional acousticians use. But we're inputting the proposed topography for the site, so all the grading that's going to be on the site is in there. We take into account all of the land cover that's on the site, so where all the concrete's going to be, that's all less absorptive than the grass and some of the wetlands and stuff that are out there right now. We also put those receptor points, like you mentioned, in the front property lines of all the houses surrounding the property. We take into account
either typical or exact equipment levels.
Just one second. You said you put receptors.
Yep.
It's not physical receptors on the property, but it's in the plan. Is that correct?
So it's in the noise modeling software. We like set a point where we're able to figure out exactly what that noise level.
You didn't drive out on St. Louis River Road and put out a receptor though.
We did go out as part of our noise analysis and actually measure noise levels on our sites, but we took those measurements at representative distances to the homes surrounding the site. So our measurements weren't in the exact locations of those homes, but the noise levels will be similar to what you would hear in the front yard of one of these houses. To get back into the modeling stuff, we have all the proposed buildings that are in there, and then we run with typical backgrounds like weather, humidity, what we would anticipate those project noise levels to be. And we do that for all the different operational conditions. Does that answer your question or your question?
In layman's terms, yes, I guess. That's
Okay.
as simple as I think I can understand it.
Yeah, it's interesting to know that the current facility is operating higher than allowed. But it's good to hear that this facility will be quieter than what's already there.
I have another question that's not related to sound. I think early in the presentation you mentioned that one of the things that one of the comments was lacking alternative studies. And was that going to be addressed then through the comments?
Alternatives.
Alternative sites, yes.
That was something we did include in the draft AUAR. There was a section at the beginning of the project description about why this site specifically was selected.
Okay, thank you. I think so.
Just checking his notes.
I think I'm good for now.
Any other questions? Correct.
Thank you.
And someone's going to talk about data center water overview. What's that? I go through that already.
We did that already as a part of the AUAR.
And again, the idea there is that, tell me when I got it wrong, if I get it wrong. It's 50,000 gallons of water for domestic use. There'll be, for each building, we'll do commissioning of 1.7 million for each building. As that building is kind of getting ready, started up, and kind of make it ready to operate. And then of that 1.7 million, it could be up to 2,000 gallons 12 times a year to just make sure to top off the radiator, make sure everything is, the chemicals are balanced all correctly like that. So, and that 2,000 gallons a month would be part of that 50,000 gallons. But we will be using a lot as each building goes on. That 1.7 is at the bottom, if I remember right, we're using about 1 million gallons a day as a city right now.
Yeah, so just to comment on the commissioning portion of it and filling that closed loop, that would have to be very closely coordinated with the city if we were to exceed that 50,000 gallon per day. There are some things that we can do to slowly feed those facilities, although that can be, it can take some time. So
It's not filling the water, your swimming pool with a garden hose.
that's right.
It takes a while.
So we would want to do that in close coordination with the city. We've seen things where we can only fill at higher rates during certain hours or certain times of the year and that sort of thing. So we would just need to really focus on coordination there.
Well, and I think it's important for the council to understand is that when the utilities are built, there'll be water testing and filling as part of the commissioning of its system as well. So if we build a new water tower, we're going to have to make sure that the water tower is working the way it ought to, and that might be part of that water usage over and above that. So just need to be aware of that. As we build that utility, there'll be water usage in the commission of that the city will have to do.
So remind me one more time, what's going to happen with and I wrote it down here, the 192 comments, people commented, there could be many comments within those. Explain what's going to happen with all of those comments.
So there will be an attachment to the final AUAR that includes a comment response document, so that'll respond to all of the public and agency comments that we received. I went through a few of these new topics here tonight too, so there will be some updates that you'll see in the final AUAR, and we'll also have a table as part of the comment response document that lists what those changes were and what response to comments that was associated with by chapter or by topic.
Can we post a copy of this presentation on the Hermantown site?
Can we share it on Facebook so everyone knows it's up there?
Yes, I'm on the site for sure. Yes, that's our council desire.
Make it easy for people when we've got information out there.
And I think it was mentioned that there will be some further community meetings. And I know that Halston's on vacation this week, but she's talked about hosting those as well. And then I received a call from Trent at Google today asking me my thoughts on what that might entail. So I think just for the rest of the council to know that I think that there's some good movement and activity there to continue some community dialogue and hopefully get some small groups of community meeting and they have some thoughts on how they're going to do that. So that's good.
Just one of the things that we've talked about on a staff level, we haven't confirmed this yet, but we'd also we're thinking about doing a joint work session with the city council and planning commission, that possibility when we get closer to the application process.
My only other comment on that would be is just adequate time. You know, we're going to have a lot of things to be looking at and, you know, talk about 10 days of the AUAR, and, you know, obviously several thousand pages of data is going to require some time to sit through, and maybe when the finals put together, maybe we need to have another session just like this to kind of review the final. So just, I know I'll need some more time to get it on Thursday and need to approve it on Monday, so.
Well, and it may very well mean that we have to have some work sessions other than the fourth Monday.
Yes, correct.
When can we expect the final AUAR before presenting on vote?
That's one time.
Mayor Shea, Councilor Jemmy, we plan, the schedule right now is to submit the final AUAR to the agencies on the EQB in early August. And then we would then, that gives a review period for the agencies only after that. And then if we do not receive any additional comments, we would then bring it forward for consideration by council in early September.
If there are additional comments, what does that do to the timeline?
I'd have to look to the experts in the room on, I reviewed the statute today, actually, but I'm not going to venture.
City would then go back to those commenters, that state, particular state agency, and then go through negotiations on revisions to the AUAR.
And that process, if the agencies provide additional comments, we would try to address those comments with the agencies, and then that would be part of the final AUAR that would be presented to you.
Correct.
I asked a question about the closed loop being louder than an open loop, and I think I heard the answer was yes. We toured, some of us toured an open system, Are there any closed loop systems in the near vicinity to go look and listen to? When I say near vicinity, I mean 1,000 miles.
I'll pay the plane ticket.
I would say, yeah, we can look into that. And then, you know, as was mentioned, there are noise mitigation measures both at the site level and then at the local level, local to the actual cooling units. So there are a couple different levers that we can pull on that. But let me look into that and see where the closest one is.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, I'll say my last question, but I probably won't be. One of the community members had asked us a few times to explore waste heat and how we could utilize that in the community. I think there's been some European data centers that have done that. Is there any, has that been explored, or is it just something that just wouldn't be feasible in this location and you know, where it's going to go?
Yeah, so it's not widely utilized in the U.S. We do have some projects in Europe that we're working on. But I guess what I could offer is that our experts internally could maybe present on a couple of those projects to you all and just see if there is an opportunity here.
Again, we've got some community members asking about that, so it would be at least something that we can say we did look at and explore. I'll say it to my last one.
Any other questions? If not, I think we could be done.
I do just think that it's important to know that a lot of these and the questions people have will be addressed in the special use permit and any of those other specific project applications, correct?
Yeah, so even though as we looked at that, is that we talk about the topic, we talk about here are mitigation strategies. When we get to the permit, we'll say this is specifically how we're going to try to mitigate those issues. For instance, sound. This is what we will do in terms of tree planting, walls, berms, to mitigate sound. And again, that's just one topic. There might very well be other, you know, sound mitigation things that might happen on an operational level in terms of, you know, putting a muffler on it or whatever.
Yeah, I'm still hung up on the neighbor's wells, and I want to,
Yeah.
that's got to be addressed somehow.
Yeah, so again, we'll talk about it, like, here's the issue, here are mitigation strategies, and then when we get to the permitting process, here's the mitigation strategy that will be used in this case.
And I think we're going to need some work sessions on that too, to get council input and, or, you know, after staff's reviewed it, a thorough review with council and discussion. Maybe more than just that Monday meeting. Or maybe that joint work session with the planning commission.
Anything else, Mayor?
No, just in reading the AUAR, I'm not excited about losing the 10,000 trees.
Again, we can talk about that as part of the design application.
A lot more back.
Thank you for presenting. Thank you for your questions. Again, this is a process. It's a long process, and we'll continue to work through it. So, thank you. Thank you for coming and your participation and attendance in that listening. Thank you.